Exhibitionistas. So glad that you're with us for this very special episode where we're diving back into exhibitions. This time with Tracey Emin's show, I Followed You to the End. That's at White Cube Bermondsey until the 10th of November. So if you find yourself in London, I highly recommend going and giving this extraordinary show a visit. And this was a great conversation. I have to say, for better or worse, certainly worse, I did not know a ton about this hugely powerful voice in the art world that is Tracey Emin. And it was such a pleasure to learn more about her incredible life, how much she has to give to the art world and beyond. And it was just a fascinating episode for me personally, and I hope that you enjoy it too. And of course, as ever, talking to Joanna about it was great fun. So I want to flag up front that there's some references to rape, to abortion. So if you're not in the mood for that kind of thing, you're with someone who might not, find that appropriate. Just wanted to give you a heads up. And also, in other news, we have started a Patreon account. So you can find in the show notes a link to it. And come join us. We are so happy to have you along. And if you're able to give us 5 bob, as they say in the UK, that would be enormously appreciated. Obviously, if that's not available to you right now, that's not a problem, but we would very, very wholeheartedly welcome any donations or contributions you can give to the show. Without further ado, hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, exhibitionistas. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the second episode of the season, but the first where we're diving back into an exhibition and an artist to discuss with each other and, of course, with you. So this episode will examine the exhibition I Followed You to the End, a big body of paintings and sculpture by Dame Tracey Emin. My name is Emily Harding, and much like you, I assume I am an art lover and an exhibition goer.
I am Joanna Pierre-Neves, independent writer and curator and artistic director of Drawing Now Art Fair. I am writing a book titled Female Drawing Machines about drawing and technology from a feminist perspective. And I'm your co-host today, and as usual. And I'm really, really looking forward to talking about the show and to being back at a time when we need culture more than ever. I'm not one of those people who question art when the going gets tough. On the contrary, I'm working with a Lebanese artist, and we started talking about the escalation in the Middle East, getting really despondent about it. And suddenly she pointed to her artistic work and said, I'm so glad I have this. And I guess, my week confirmed what you said in the first episode, Emily, about the healing power of art. It does have that power, and it brings us together. So how has your week been?
Yeah, it's been good. And I mean, just to go back to that, so she said, I'm so glad I have this. And others are so glad she has it as well. That's the thing about art, is like that ability to connect for so many people, not just the people who are creating it, which is wonderful. But so I'm glad you brought up that healing, because I think this exhibition is right in that sweet spot. I mean, for Emin, this exhibition reflects on how she's living her life following her cancer diagnosis from 2020, which no one, even her doctors, apparently expected her to survive. But it also brought up a lot of feelings about my own health, which we can talk about later on when we talk about the exhibition. It felt really personal looking at the work she produced for this. So I love that serendipity and how you can experience things just at the right time. But my week, I mean, it was great. Actually, I dipped my toes back into the work for the first time in several weeks. So it's, very much easing my way in a slow way, but it felt great to start to piece back a more normal routine. So I'm taking it slow, and it felt difficult for sure, but the right kind of difficult. And, just kind of reaching out to feel the edges of capacity, which is good. But yeah, so how was your week, Joanna?
I went to the drawing room where they have this impressive exhibition by Emma McNally, whose drawings
Mm,
on paper form a sort of grotto. You are even given a flashlight to explore it. It's very
wow.
surprising. Yeah, it was really, really nice. Very good. So it like a really good season start for the drawing room. And I'm also reading Ulysses To Have and To Be Had, which is a
Hmm.
series of essays stringed together to form a sort of narrative about money, property, and status.
Huh.
And she makes it very, very cool, actually. I thought this is not for me. These are not the themes that draw me to any book.
Yeah. So
But yeah,
is it current? She's a current writer, or is this
she
something that was
is.
written?
She's
Okay.
an essayist, and this I can't remember the date of the book. But she's someone who's been around in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, I think. I don't know how I got to her. Oh, it's because I'm working with an artist called Danica Phelps, who I'm going to include in an exhibition about notations. So the idea of like the codes that we invent when language is not enough, like
Huh.
notations in music, notations in dance, and how that kind of cross references with drawing. And so Danica Phelps is a really interesting American artist whose work has always been about quantifying the input and output of money in her life. And she found codes to put into her drawings that mark that flow, that cash flow in and
Mm.
out of her life. It's really interesting. And she has a series of drawings where she did a trip with her son, I think, or her offspring, and it's just drawings of the child doing stuff. And then at the bottom, I think she went to the Grand Canyon. She was traveling across America, and so she has a color for each aspect of money spending,
Huh.
but she drew them in a way that it's not charts, it's kind of like a landscape. So it's like lines and over lines over lines that form these hills and these landscapes at the bottom of the drawings. And at the same time, it just made me think, wow, that really is what parenting is, isn't it? You're doing the best for your child, you're traveling, but you carry that responsibility of
Mm.
providing. And at the same time, providing becomes an act of love and an act of sustainability for that, very small person's life.
Hmm.
It's beautiful work. And she made, so in the States, not the book I have, unfortunately, in the States, she did the cover of that book. And we were
Okay.
talking on Zoom, and she said, oh, by the way, one of these drawings was used as a cover of a book, and that's how I got to the book, because then she started talking about it. And I thought, huh, that might be interesting. And
Mm.
actually I'm completely
Yeah.
hooked. Yeah, I'm in it. How about
Oh,
you?
cool.
What are you doing?
My main obsession has been this podcast. I just discovered that it's been around a little while. It's called One Song with Diallo Riddle and Luxury. So they are DJs and musicologists. They're kind of in the business, and they discuss the work of an artist through one song. So I got to say, there's something in the format that speaks to me, Joanna. It sounds,
It sounds familiar.
yeah, like something I'd really like to do, but yeah, it's great because like a lot of music, like a lot of art podcasts, as you've talked about before, a lot of art podcasts are interviews with artists, which are great. And a lot of music podcasts are interviews with artists, which are also great. I really enjoy their Song Exploder, and where they go into how an artist sort of made a song. How did it all come together for them? But this is a bit different in that, it's two people who are just fanatical about music and really, really knowledgeable. And they go into a song and they talk about the artist, their body of work, and then they have actual stems. So like they'll take out the rhythm section or just the bass line or the
Oh,
vocals, and you'll hear that on its own. And I guarantee you, for songs you have heard a million times, there are things you not have known were in there that just like give it this depth and resonance that you wouldn't have expected in a lot of cases anyway. So they did this episode on Heart. I mean, I love me some Anne and Nancy Wilson, and they broke down Barracuda, and it is a delight. If you like music podcasts, the other one I would recommend is, Add to Playlist, which is a great one. It's a BBC one where they start with a song, and then there's a couple of hosts, and they bring in a couple of guests, and then they say, "Oh, you know what that song made me think of? Is this other song." And sometimes it's
Oh,
something, related, that seems maybe natural, like a natural leap. But often it is very different. They might say, "Oh, well, this
oh.
kind of the folk lyrics of this rock song made me think of a Welsh folk tune." And then they'll be talking about, and then you'll get introduced to artists and genres that you would have never kind of fallen on otherwise. But that's another great
That
one.
is
But
so
yeah,
cool.
one song is so good. And I love how, musically geeky these guys are. I mean, they're just so deep in it and just love to share the joy, which is the perfect combination.
Yeah, it's very communicative and it's very much what we are about as well. Like I really
Yeah.
felt like a sort of a connection there. Yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah. A power duo, just like us.
So a power duo, just like us. So having said all this, do you want to introduce the artist and the exhibition we'll be discussing
I
today?
would love to. Yeah. So Dame Tracey Emin was born in 1963 in London. You've heard of her, of course. Everyone has heard of her. She is one of the most powerful artists that have come out of the UK. She is known for installations, most notably a couple of pieces of work, which are Everyone I've Ever Slept With, 1963 to 1995, which is a piece that she did in 1995, and My Bed, which was an installation that she did in 1998, nominated for the Turner Prize. She didn't get it, but it was all the buzz at the time. So she also worked in video, printing, drawing, painting, sculpture. She has an immense body of work that has this common thread of being deeply personal, confessional, and very, very intimate. So this is something that she got critiqued for, which we'll talk a little bit about, but that intimacy is so essential to her work. And
Mm,
I
yeah.
yeah, really, really powerful. So there's an immense amount of information on Emin out there. So you can't be a very personal, very confessional artist without there being quite a bit out there on you. And she, has been, she does a lot of interviews. She's, accessible as an artist, which is wonderful. So that's just to say that there's a wonderful hole to fall into on the internet that is all about Tracey Emin. As I dug into research, I read Jonathan Jones's book Tracey Emin, and then read Strangeland, which is a 2005 autobiography from Tracey Emin. I mean, spoiler here, she can write really well too. So I listened. There's loads of podcasts out there and loads of videos available on YouTube from the BBC, White Cube, and others, including a Channel 4 program that is called Is Painting Dead from
Oh,
1997,
I
which,
wondered if you got to that. We have to talk about
oh
that.
my God, yes, yes, because it's like, she was known in the art world absolutely in the 90s, but this 1997 appearance on this show is why the culture started to know her, and sort of a
Yeah,
broader public.
yeah.
It brought her, just huge exposure for non-artistic reasons that we can
That we will
discuss.
talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I may interject, I was thinking while preparing this episode that she's the counterexample of what I keep saying about contemporary artists, which is that you can't find anything about them online or in articles.
Mm,
Because there has been a love hate affair between Tracey Emin and the press, TV, and social media
yeah.
in this country that is quite unusual. and which has not always been very good for her mental health, I am sure. But good for us, I guess. I mean, you can find a wealth of things online about her, with her. It's incredible, and she's one of the very few artists that you can really, really do research on, and who has a
Yeah.
voice, and who's been talked about in sometimes really interesting ways and sometimes really diminishing and crushing ways. But yeah,
Yeah.
well, we'll talk about all that, yeah, later on for sure.
Totally, totally. And I mean, I just didn't know a ton about her before the bed. Like the bed was somewhere in my consciousness. And then her neon sculptures. I mean, I'm at St. Pancras
Mm,
occasionally, and she has a
yeah.
big one there. Ignorantly, I would have put her in the category of sensationalist artist. I don't
Mm-hmm,
know,
mm-hmm.
is there a lot of there? I never.
It's really interesting that you were aware of her, but you didn't quite. I think she's one of the most unknown known artists
Mm,
in the UK, because you
totally
think you know
agree,
her, but you don't really. And
but you
she's
don't
painted all her
really.
life, actually. Yeah, exactly.
Totally. And I mean, and I think that's what was such a pleasure about researching, or even her voice. When I listened to the first interview podcast that I listened to, I wasn't expecting a non-posh voice. I mean, I didn't know. I
So, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
you were in it for a ride then.
Yeah, totally. And I was like, "Oh, wow, she's," because I mean, there's such a thing with accents in this country. Mayor Khan having South London accent as a political official on his level has been noted many times,
Yeah,
and so,
yeah,
yeah, so it's like I heard the sound of her voice and I was like, "Oh, wow, I didn't expect that." So it has been a
yes, yeah.
pleasure and a real great surprise to sort of investigate what a complex, fascinating character she is, for sure.
And so, for our non UK listeners, so this idea of accents is that accents in the UK really show where you come from. So, if you have a very Downton Abbey accent, you are posh, you are well off, you are part of the right side of society. And if you have Tracey Emin's accent, you come from working class. So there's a working class accent that's very, very particular, very specific. There are many of them. And sometimes other accents, like the Northern accent, are associated with working class people, where maybe that's my ignorance as a foreigner, but that's not quite right. So that it's very difficult to penetrate these accents and the
Yeah,
classism in the UK. I'm still trying to figure it out, so I will not pretend to explain it bit by bit to you, non-UK listener. But
yeah.
there definitely is something about the way she speaks and her directedness, and there's not a single podcast with her that doesn't have a fuck or a fucking
Oh god,
in the
yeah.
middle there, and she's so at ease with the way she speaks. That is quite strange and unusual here in the UK, in
Mm,
the art scene. So just to explain what we're talking about for those of you who are kind of
yeah,
finding out about her, and to be very honest with you, we both found out more about her during this episode. I myself, even though I knew more about her, ended up discovering much more things about her that I didn't know, and that's why we do this. This is
yeah,
it was also a pleasure for me, to be very honest, and
I
kind of
bet.
allowed me to revisit these things, and this aspect, because I was at university when this all happened in the 90s, when she came about. So I kind of thought I knew things that I didn't quite know, as usual.
Yeah, it's the beauty of it. So, as I said, Emin was born in London, but she grew up in Margate, which is a seaside holiday town in Kent on the coast, where her father, who was a Turkish Cypriot immigrant, owned a hotel and some other properties. Her family was pretty well off at that point.
Mm, mm,
So
mm, mm,
they
mm,
weren't wealthy, but there weren't money problems per se. And her
mm.
parents, by most standards, had a pretty unusual relationship, insofar
Oh.
as her father was married to and had children with another woman and was not willing to get a divorce. So, yeah, yeah, he
I didn't know
married
that.
he married another woman. Well, I mean, she was pretty young when they got married. I want to say she was still a teenager, his first wife. But it was
Wow.
a woman in his village in Cyprus, who it
Oh, so
was
was married back home.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And
Oh,
then
double
he
life.
he came well, she was the wife came with him to the UK, the first wife,
Oh,
so was living also in Margate.
no.
Yeah, and then Tracy's father got with Tracy's mother, and they had twins, Tracy and her brother, and they made an agreement that was, look, the best that Tracy's mom was going to get was 3 days a week, and that was the agreement that they came to. So it sounds like it was
Wait, so what he
reasonably
lived
open.
with the other he
Yeah,
lived with the other family at the same time?
yeah, like half week.
So, oh, that's a complex situation to be
It
in for
is,
sure.
yeah.
Especially at that time. She was born in the 60s, right?
And I mean, I don't know, who knows how well Tracy's mom was with the situation. I mean, but it seemed to work. And Tracy's mom changed her last name to Emin for that period of time that they were together. But then, unfortunately, her father went bankrupt, lost the hotel, and left the country. So that was a pretty
Oh.
traumatic pivot point in her life. And that's when,
Mm.
the financial picture really disintegrated, and her mom had to work several jobs in hotels that she was once helped running because Tracy's
Mm.
father owned them.
Mm.
And so this
Mm.
thrust Tracy, her twin brother Paul, and her older brother Alan into poverty. And she talks a lot about how difficult that was. And so now it's like her father isn't around. Her mom essentially isn't around because she's having to work so much. And
Yeah,
she's
500
barely
jobs at the same time. Yeah,
there was
exactly.
some squatting, there was a lot of, housing insecurity and all that kind of stuff. And so this was a big shift for her, and she will come back to this kind of again and again in her work, as her work is autobiographical. And Margate in and of itself has made a huge mark on her. I mean, she's since moved back there, but the Margate influence is certainly most clear in some of the films she made in the late 90s. So, as I said, she's since moved back after spending lots of her life in London, and she started a residency. I found it surprising to know how much she loved and appreciated her father, even after she was clearly really heartbroken by his actions and his departure. And they ended up having, a relationship in her life when she got older. And I mean, I'm sure there's,
Really?
yeah, yeah. So she
So he
spent
never
some
came back to
time,
the UK? Did he
not,
come back to the UK? No,
n-
she has a relationship with him over there in
yeah.
Cyprus.
So she spent some time in the 80s there when she was in her 20s. They seemed to have a real kinship. They seemed to be very similar people in a way, kind of real
Oh, I see.
storytellers. And, obviously, Tracey Emin is nothing if not wildly independent. And
Yeah.
you get the sense that her father is the same. I mean, think about it. He's an immigrant coming to this country. He was planning on going to Australia, and then he found out about no non-whites policy, and so stayed in the UK. And then, has this, this two wife thing going on. I mean, I think that's,
It takes
that
some
that
gumption to kind of just openly say, "Listen,
mhm.
this is who I am. Take me or leave me. Have kids with me or don't." And that's how it's going to be.
Especially as an immigrant, I would say, I
As an
mean, this
immigrant,
is,
as a
yeah.
non-white.
She'd mentioned that her father's first wife was a lovely woman and was like, look, the children are not to blame for all of this mess that the adults had sort of waded into with all of this. And, yeah, I think that's a remarkable thing as well, for that kind of grace to be afforded in a situation like that.
There's another aspect to her life that is quite complex as well, right? Which is pertaining to her sexuality.
Totally. Yeah. So sex is a big part of her work in all of its guises. And she has experienced rape and sexual assault and abortions, as well as lots of other sexual experiences. And she is all in for exploring these and expressing her relationship to these things throughout her work. So it's a major, major theme.
And she's not at pains to say that she did this very early on, pre Me Too, when no one was talking of. I mean, Marlène Dumas talked about it. I mean, no one was talking about it in a way that made them part of the subject. A lot of people would have been talking about it as representing it, but she was talking about it from her own perspective in order to connect with women who had gone through the same thing. And she's
Mm.
very clear about it. And she states very clearly, I've always done this. I've always been persecuted for doing it. And now the times are catching up with me.
Her body and its pain and ecstasy and just plain humanness have always been depicted in her work, her paintings, photographs, and really powerfully in sculpture, which there's a
Mm,
couple of examples of in the
yes.
show.
In the
Oof.
show. Yeah. Wow, wow, wow.
So she shares herself, and when she's at her most vulnerable, I mean, menstruating, masturbating, without holding back at all from any of it, but also with a whole heap of pathos. And it's like, when you look at a Egon Schiele, who was a huge influence on her and her
Mm-hmm.
work, and that is abundantly
Mm-hmm.
clear in the show as well, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it feels like looking at one of them from the inside out in a way. It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
she's she's so intimately associated with the form. It is her body in most cases that she's drawing, her actual body.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really palpable.
To me, it feels a bit because, I think we've spoken about this before. I had a student who really, really opened my eyes to Egan Schiele's history and also the Vienna Circle at the time. There was a lot of teenage abuse. I mean, artists abusing teenagers, and Schiele was one of them. He kidnapped a kid, for Christ's sakes.
Oh,
He
geez.
kidnapped
Wow.
a little girl. So he disappeared with her for a few days. She was the child of a
Jeez.
powerful magnate or a powerful man where he was staying, and it was a whole thing. So in some ways, when I look at her work and I see that she was influenced by it, it makes complete sense because it's suddenly she is that kind of person when suddenly, of course, she may have been influenced by his artistry and his technique, but also it's as if one of his models, which were basically little girls who were living in the streets, and he would bring them into his studio and do whatever he wanted with them in
Mm,
exchange of some food and some warmth. I mean, literally heat. They were freezing
yeah.
in the street. And it's as if these girls suddenly started speaking through Tracey Emin.
Oh, wow.
So sometimes when artists say they're influenced by Egan Schiele, I'm like, oh, that's so annoying because he is such a powerful artist. But at the same time, when you really look at the drawings, those girls are not comfortable. He's
Yeah.
overarching, he's always painting them from above or drawing them. But actually, with Tracey Emin, it makes a lot of sense, especially with her relationship with the openness of the the sort of harm that her dad may have caused to families, but also the love he may have brought to them and the complexity of these issues.
Mm,
She speaks about them from within. And I think that's
yeah.
also what's so powerful in this relationship with Egan Schiele that she definitely has, and a lot of artists do. But with her, it makes so much sense.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's, her relationship maybe to her father, but also to, she talks a lot about the men that she had sex with, when she was a teenager and they were like 25, 30. And she's like, who are these men? Like,
Who are
I
these men?
was I was out there. She dropped out of school at 13. She had some time on her hands. And, she was having, she was raped at that time in an alley. And she started, becoming sexually active, which is not uncommon. And so for her, it's one thing, but it's like, these men should have known better. And what was it like? Why are they having sex with a teenage girl? And yeah,
Mm.
why is Egon Sheila kidnapping? I mean,
A little
there's
girl.
a little girl. Yeah, here's some
Yeah.
heat. Yeah, yeah, I don't know.
She
But
does say, to put it into context, that a lot of her, so she was fascinated with art when she was a kid.
mhm,
That's something that has always been with her. She's like a true artist in the sense of having been really comforted by art and by her drawing. She drew and wrote a lot ever since she was a little girl. And she says that she looked around at some point and 13, 14, 15-year olds, girls were pregnant, were in relationships with men probably older than them or a bit older, like 18, 19, 20. And she said, I don't want this for myself. Like, this is not for me. I don't want to go through this. So there was an awareness, I guess, of that time and that place. And she talks about Margate with a lot of warmth and a lot of tenderness, but also realizing that it was one of the poorest parts of the country at the time. It still is a
mm,
complex space. And there was the mores there were these, and that was the norm as well at the time. And it was also the norm to make fun of a woman menstruating. Like,
mm,
she's from that generation that we lived
yeah,
as well. I mean, even though we're a bit younger, where it was shameful. Everything related to women was shameful. So she's a real trooper for us,
yeah,
I have to say.
absolutely. And I have to say, looking at the drawings of herself and the paintings of herself and all of it, I wonder if I were to draw myself at the lowest times of my life and the most intimate, could I be as honest and empathetic?
Mm,
I mean,
mm.
I think that's a feat. That's a real feat to have, a very harsh light on the thing, but also have it be held with the pathos that she has it held in. I mean, that's really, really something to behold.
So there's a story about her where she realized that she wasn't the skinny, pretty thing she had been before, and she was invited to do a show in New York at the end of the
Mhm.
90s. And she was really depressed with her body. So, like, a very
Mm.
common female experience, male too, obviously, non-binary too, for sure. But let's say the weight of the 90s
Yeah.
skinniness was weighing on her. And so she was disgusted by her body and she thought, what am I to do? And then she had this invitation for this show. So she built a sort of a box where she was to live for, I think, 3 weeks. So between two menstruations, because she didn't want to menstruate during that period because she was naked. So she was
Yeah.
naked the whole time. There were some peepholes so people could look into the space she was living in. And to cut a very long story short, because I think we could do an episode just on that piece, she spent the first days reading The Guardian. So she was delivered The Guardian. So she was hiding behind the newspaper because she couldn't live with her self-image and knowing that people will be looking at her body. And she said that at the end of that period she felt so free. She felt completely in tune with herself and her body, and that was her. And it was the acceptance of maybe a body she didn't love as much or society didn't love as much, but it was her own body. And that's, I mean, listen, that's
Mm.
crazy, right? To do
Yeah.
such a thing, to just go like, okay, I have this problem. How am I to solve this? And it is
Yeah.
always through art, and it's always through a sort of communitarian situation. So that's kind of, yeah.
And she hadn't painted in 5 years at that point as well. So she wanted to reconnect with herself as a painter, and that was part of the
True,
the
exactly.
impetus for this. And So they have redone that room as an installation in various exhibitions as well.
Thank you, Emily, for pointing out that it was a return to painting. And that's really interesting that she was naked painting
Mm-hmm.
for the first
Mm-hmm.
time in 5 years and relating to her own body and also giving that to the public. I think it makes a lot of sense when you see the exhibition now in White Cube and Bermondsey.
So, as we said, she dropped out of school as a teenager, but she still sought art education throughout the 80s. She went to Medway College of Design, Maidstone College of Art, and the Royal College of Art. She
Oh,
had her first, yeah, I mean, she was basically studying all of the 80s in one
yeah,
place or another. And so she was,
yeah,
totally throwing herself into it, getting into the scene, I mean, just a really voracious appetite. I mean, she was, she was not half in, half out. Maybe I'll just see, you get the sense
yeah,
that she was just really throwing it all on the table and,
yes,
got a
yes.
first class degree in printing. And I mean, so she was very, very much in it. And then she had her first solo show at the White Cube in 1993, and it was called My Major Retrospective, which I love because I mean, so 1993 is also the year of the founding of the White Cube. The title, my major retrospective. This referenced the fact that Emin didn't believe that she was a new artist, and she talks about this in interviews. She was like, "They call us the YBA, but like I was in my late 30s."
And it's a bit sad. I mean, we haven't talked about the alcohol issue she had. She was a heavy drinker, to say the least, and she had a reputation for that. And she was a woman, and she was pretty. She was youngish, and she is interesting because in interviews of those days, and even after the 2000s, she says many times, "Do you know I went to art school? Like I went to art school. I spent many years educating myself, and she even did a philosophy degree."
Ah,
Which she loved. She was very, very into it. And she has to keep reminding people because people
yeah.
don't take her seriously. So, my major retrospective is also like, guys, I know what I'm doing, it's intentional.
But do you wanna say a bit more about the YBA, Young British Artists, and just kind of that time?
Sure. I mean, again, like I said, I was at university at the time, so I came into this profession and into this field hearing about the past, like the very recent past of the YBA, and I didn't even know what it stood for, YBA, but
Mm,
it just means Young British Artists who are actually still around, no longer that young. And their work was on display as part of the Saatchi collection at the Royal Academy of London in the exhibition Sensation in 1997. So after this show that you just mentioned, that's when the YBA took on an international aura and made a sort of a big splash in the art world. So artists such as Matt Collishaw, Damien Hirst, Gillian Waring, Sarah Lucas just had a retrospective at Tate Britain, Marcus Harvey with the infamous portrait Myra, which was of the child sex abuser and killer Myra Hindley. And it was made with imprints of children's hands dipped in grey, white, and black paint. So that was kind of one of the major focuses of the exhibition for the press and for the general public. There was Michael Landy. I mean, lots of artists that are now established um, were parts of this exhibition. And so, what kind of changed in this young generation is that they were very free with their materials, even the painters, as I mentioned with Marcus Harvey, and they used the literal thing that they were talking about. So the work would talk about something, and they would take the thing to make the work or the material. So, for instance, an artist such as Mark Quinn did a self portrait, which was a cast of his own face, but it was made up with 10 pints of his own blood frozen in silicone. And
wow,
in the same
that's
vein, yeah. That's kind of, my legs go really,
Hmm.
really numb when I talk about this.
Oh,
Blood is just it's the whole thing. And we will talk about it later on. So, in the same vein, Eamon's work at the time used her own life and intimacy to frame the vulnerability of women in society. Damien Hirst placed animals in formaldehyde tanks, for instance, and of course, Marcus Harvey's portrait of Myra Hindley that I've just mentioned. So, in some ways, they brought real life into the museum, whereas museums usually represent stuff that remains outside. So this is not that new. And if you think of Marcel Duchamp and the Surrealists and lots of artists beforehand, but let's say that in some ways, and the criticism towards this generation is the grittiness and the negativity that they brought into the museum, a sort of the world is what it is, and we're showing it. Which I mean, my take would be that this is kind of their age at the time. They were quite young. And if you
yeah.
look at those artists now, they are quite well off and famous around the world. Others have kind of dissipated, but they all grew, quote unquote, grew up, as it were. So I'm always a bit surprised at the reactions people have to visual artists. And I guess perhaps people do that also with other art forms, which is that we don't consider the age of the artist. And what I find really moving about the YBA is that they were young, they were powerful, they had gumption, and they were of their own age, of their own generation. They changed quite a bit. I mean, if you think of Arthur Rimbaud, the famous French poet that disappeared in Africa, although his poems are very good, they are poems of a person who was between his teens and a young adult age. And when I studied him at school, it was taken as this sort of universal, ageless kind of poetry. And when I realized it, I was almost his age when I was studying him. I was like, okay, so this speaks to a very specific state of mind, a very specific sense of adventurousness, and a very specific need to break the mold. And those YBAs did break the mold. They were very skilled. There was innovation there. There was knowledge of materials that weren't supposed to be materials of art all the time. And skill impresses people. And we confuse skill with maturity. I mean, these artists, like we saw with Emin, they were educated, they were passionate about art, and they wanted to be showing their work. Because one thing that Emin stresses out as well is that this generation didn't have a whole bunch of museums, a whole bunch of galleries to show their work in. So they really wanted to be out there. They wanted to communicate. They had things to say, but there weren't that many situations where you could say things. And so this YBA generation found themselves at the Royal Academy of Art in the Sensation exhibition. The Royal Academy is a revered space of fabulously established or dead artists. So that kind of
Traditional.
created
Yeah.
a tumultuous relationship with this generation that we'll probably talk about later on. So yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting moment in history.
For Emin, there were as we talked about earlier, the two breakout installations that demonstrate, where she was at this time. And the first is The Tent, Everyone I Ever Slept With, 1963 to 1995, which she made in 95, and My Bed, which is the installation that she made in 1998. And the first is a tent, a tent that you might
Mm.
take camping, a dome tent
Yeah.
with appliqued names of everyone she'd had slept with. And as we said before, not just people she had sex with, which included that as well, but anyone, who she literally slept with. So it does what it says on the tin. So the piece was bought by Saatchi and exhibited in the Sensation exhibition that you just mentioned in 1997. Sadly, it was destroyed in a warehouse
I
fire.
know.
Yeah, in
Mm.
2004. Do you want to say a little bit more about Sensation and that exhibition?
The exhibition was organized by Norman Rosenthal and gathered a whole generation of what I would call like post-punk artists. I'm sorry, I know these post-pre words are so silly, but I do make a connection between the 80s and that no future generation and this sort of grittiness but also this very intense awareness of wanting to make it and to establish themselves as trendsetters in the art world, for lack of a better expression. And so they produced gritty, unashamed, really visceral works. I don't want to put everyone in the same category because, I mean, you have Jenny Saville in there, who's
Yeah.
a marvelous painter. She was in the summer show at the Royal Academy this year, as was Gillian Waring as well, and Tracey Emin. I mean, these were artists that were changing the game, but there was such an exaggeration also in regards to their work. So, Sensation introduced them to the world and the general public, reversing the idea we had of the UK and UK artists around the world, which was that they were dipped in oil or acrylic paint.
Mm.
So, none of that for this generation, whose paintings were deemed not like Turner's, which was a shock considering that the Turner Prize was established in 1984. So it's hard to talk about the YBA and Sensation without talking about the Turner Prize.
Yeah.
That was kind of like the triangulation that brought contemporary art to the minds of the general public in the UK and caused an uproar for sure. You know, all of these things together kind of made up for an explosive material. The prize was established in 84 in praise of the boldness but by now very established kind of painting of William Turner. And the general public seemed to expect it to reward painting and seemed to expect to see painting at the Royal Academy, which I think was also the problem with this exhibition. So the prize had already introduced some of these artists of the exhibition, such as Damien Hirst, and Sensation was the ideal event to excite the general public and the journalists and art critics who were aghast not only with the art, but also with the behavior of certain artists,
I can
amongst
imagine.
which was Tracey Emin, who was very drunk during a Channel 4 program titled, and this is crazy, and I urge you
Yeah.
to rewatch this on YouTube because the thing was called "Is Painting Dead?" and it is absolutely hilarious.
It's cringy, cringy beyond words. I mean, she makes it cringy because, you know, she is absolutely hammered during it. But even without her, it would have been
even without
the
her,
cringiest conversation ever. I mean, like it was such a great, like it was like getting in a time machine, you know, and going back to that time because it was so just of its time. It was just right up its own bum. There were people in bow ties, for God's sake. I
for God's
mean,
sake, and the hair. Oh my God, the
oh,
hair.
the
Oh,
hair. Yeah,
and
yeah.
Norman Rosenthal is talking, so the camera spans to him, and he has two kisses, one kiss on each
Oh,
cheek, probably by Tracey Emin.
yeah,
And he talks like really seriously about the importance of painting and what painting is and what it's not and what it's
yeah,
doing. And you're just looking at him and thinking, man, you're wearing a tuxedo, you have two kisses on your
yeah.
face. What is happening? you
And
know,
if you didn't know better, you might think to yourself, "Is this like a late night skit? Is that what
yeah,
this
completely,
like I mean, you're
completely.
waiting for the joke to drop, you know, but you're just left in this ambiguity and then she pipes in and
And
yeah.
kudos to Tim Marlowe, who's the presenter, who
Yeah. Oh my God.
maintains his seriousness
Oh.
to the end. How did he do? Was he on beta blockers? Is my question because I don't
That
understand.
must be to date the longest hour and a half or whatever it was of
Of
his
his life.
life.
Because in the background, he's introducing the show, and in the background, you hear something falling. You
Yeah.
hear a clunking noise. And you hear a female voice going, "What's that?"
Yeah,
Someone just
yeah.
endlessly speaking while he's introducing it. And the program is amazing because the question is painting dead? And they convinced two people, two art critics, very
Oh,
serious ones, to talk in defense of of painting being alive and well, and the other one of painting being dead.
yeah.
And the one who defends painting is the then director, I think, of Modern Painters, the magazine, and the other one was the director of cultural of the cultural department at Channel 4, I think,
Yeah. Oh.
Valdemar Januszek. And
Which, I mean, that name, I mean,
listen,
every single part of this is hilarious. I mean,
and then at some point, Tracey Emin interjects and says, "Are real people watching
yeah,
this?"
I
And
know.
then she storms off.
Oh, God. Yeah. So
And she leaves.
as you say, throughout the whole thing, even when the camera is not on her, you can hear her sort of chatting with her
Chatting
neighbor
away.
or saying disparaging things or arguing with what has just been said, even though it's not her sort of moment to speak. And then, yeah, she's, I mean, and bless her, like there was, I loved, I don't know how she feels about that. I didn't read anything in afterwards about that, but I mean, in a way, it was like such a breath of fresh air to have somebody saying things like, "Are real people watching this?" Because all y'all are looking pretty pompous at this moment, and if anybody was curious about it, they will have turned it off by now.
Yeah.
And but
If anyone wants to know,
yeah,
they 10 minutes in, they will know that this is not the program that is going to
yeah,
tell them
yeah,
if painting is dead or not. And the
yeah.
program has David Sylvester, who was like such a revered critic, Norman Rosenthal, Jane Harris was such an amazing artist. She
She
passed
was,
away from cancer.
yeah, she was
Such an
good.
incredible
She was
abstract
good.
painter. Like you say, was going into a time machine because you have painting literally everywhere at the moment. The market's very conservative. Going back to sensation. So I think it's worth saying the artists that were in the exhibition. There were 21 artists, 8 women for 13 men, so not too bad.
Okay.
And the artists were Jake and Dinos Chapman, very successful, Adam Chotsko, Matt Collishaw, also successful, Tracey Emin, Marcus Harvey, Damien Hirst, Michael Landy, Abigail Lane, Sarah Lucas, Jason Martin, Ron Muick, Chris O'Philly, Richard Patterson, Simon Patterson, yes, they are related brothers, Mark Quinn, Fiona Ray, Jenny Saville, Sam Taylor Wood, Gavin Turk, Gillian Waring, Rachel Whiteread. And most of them became quite successful. Some of them got the Turner Prize, really good galleries. And it's also worth saying that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 got royal distinctions like OBEs
Okay.
and
Yeah.
CBEs and whatever. Tracey Emin is Dame Tracey Emin.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just a tidbit, like just for laughs and giggles, Sam Taylor Wood is the film director who did 50 Shades of Grey, the films.
Okay. Wow.
So
There
she
you
was an
have it.
established artist. I knew her as an artist, a bit like Steve McQueen of Hunger and 12 Years a Slave and all that. They were established artists that whose shows I've seen. So that's kind of weird.
There
That's
you
a weird
go.
one.
That is.
But anyway, this was sensation that got so much press and so much hatred from the public.
And it's aptly named because that was the big critique, wasn't it? Was that all of this new art was just sensationalist and nothing else. It wasn't crafted. And, it was just all attention getting, which is, Tracey Emin got quite a bit of that. And I mean, her
Mm-hmm.
seminal piece at this time, My Bed, it certainly got a lot of praise, but absolute rancor as well. I mean,
Yeah.
people were not happy that this could be considered art. So the bed, again, is exactly what it says on the tin. It's an installation of Tracey Emin's actual bed. And if you haven't seen it, look it up. There's loads of images of it. It's tousled sheets, bedside mess of empty vodka bottles, cigarette packs, overfilled ashtrays. There's a really cute little stuffed dog, little white stuffed dog. I think it's a dog there. Some KY jelly, old newspapers. And Jonathan Jones, in his book, describes it really well. He says, quote, my bed is found stuff in the way that caught imaginations, for better or worse. And it was and is a very pure manifestation of the idea that anything can be art. Here's her bed, unmade, unfresh, surrounded in its squalor and the detritus of a messy life. When Emin exhibited a Pier Ready Made, she did it with dollops of dirty realism. Created in 98 and shown for the Turner Prize at the Tate Gallery the following year, my bed bears the curious resemblance to Damien Hirst's tiger in a vitrine in 1991. Both flaunt their ready madeness in a way that outraged lovers of crafted art, yet both have a fleshy excitement far from the cool ironies of Duchamp, and his like bicycle
Mm,
wheel and a
mm,
table, very, very different,
mm.
kettle of fish. Sorry, that's me ad-libbing there. So, quote again, the shark shows off its deadly teeth. The bed is littered with stuff of sex and illness. All these bottles and drugs and tubes of lubricating jelly and ashtrays are not used as symbols. They are exhibited as forensic evidence, traces of the woman whose bed this was, which is I just love that. I just
Mm.
think it like really
Yeah.
encapsulates like that these are not symbols of things. These are, as you said as well, we are bringing the outside world into the museum, and she has done so in a very intimate way. She's not bringing in a tiger shark, she's bringing in herself into the
Mm.
museum, and that was
And she's not bringing in a boudoir with
yeah,
lipstick and
no,
necklaces where we
yeah,
put our masks to go out into the world. She's bringing the
exactly.
other side of it, which is incredible.
And I mean, I think one of the other things that really struck me in looking at her and sort of the conversation around her art, which isn't unique to her, but is maybe specific because she's a woman, is this whole conversation about the fact that she's making money. And,
Mm.
I listened to an interview with
What do you mean
her.
by that?
Well, so I listened to an interview with her in 2004, and the host of the interview kept coming back to this idea of, well, yeah, you're exposing yourself, but you're making a lot of money off it, aren't you? You're getting really rich. You're lining your pockets
Wow.
off of, and she wasn't as explicit as that in the interview, but it was so the undertone,
That was the subtext. Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I liked how Tracey Emin handled it. It was like, well, I'm glad, that's great that I'm making money. And quite honestly, if I didn't make any money off of this, and if I didn't get any positive feedback, I'm not sure I'd be here. Like, you have to
And she
feed
means that quite
yourself.
literally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Mm.
for sure. So it kind of reminded me of, I remember a controversy when I was at university, and any folks who know Ani DeFranco, she's a folk artist, and she was kind of big on the college scene. Ms. Magazine, great feminist magazine, gave her a nod in the 90s for all the records that she was selling. And they referred to her success only in terms of sales, that she was making more per album than Hootie and the Blowfish, which was also a big 90s band at the time, who maybe a lot of people don't remember. But just kind of that critique and that metric of rating art on commerciality rather than, in Emin's case, the fact that she is bringing things that are really intimate depictions of herself and how she is living life and navigating through life that is obviously connecting with a lot of other people. That in and of itself is something to be exalted and rewarded and talked about and praised. And I think that's what Ani DeFranco is saying. She wrote a very eloquent, pointed letter to Ms. Magazine saying, I don't want
Mm.
your accolades. Like, if it's only going to be because I've made money,
Wow.
thanks, but no thanks. And, I think that's something that not unique to women artists, but maybe got, launched at women artists more than male artists, about like, oh, well, yeah, you're doing all this confessional stuff, but you're making a lot of money off it. So that's probably why you're doing it. It's just, that must have been a lot for her to navigate at the time.
Mm. And also, don't you think it's weird in this country where you don't speak about money
Yeah. Right.
to have the guts to address that question publicly? to a person. And I agree with you that it's probably because she's a woman, but I do think it's because of her accent. Like you said yourself, you weren't
Sure.
expecting to hear that accent. And I think she's considered lesser than. And that's my theory. I'm, of course, judging a bit, but
Mm.
you have to ask yourself at some point, why are people treating her like that? You
Yeah.
don't treat people you consider as your equals
Yeah, of
like that.
course. Of
And when
course.
we say
That's
like
true.
that, scathing things were written about her. I find it beautiful. After the break, we'll talk about the exhibition to see that, you made this point of without money, artists don't produce.
Yeah.
And she was lucky enough, and we are lucky enough that she got money
Yeah.
so that she could make this show and the shows that she did before.
Well, let's take a break. I need a cup of tea.
We'll be right back after the
Right?
break.
All right. See you in a sec. So, welcome back, everyone. Joanna, do you want to introduce us to the exhibition?
Yes, with pleasure. So, first of all, the White Cube Gallery is a commercial gallery, as you said, founded in 1993. It's one of the oldest galleries of contemporary art, and so this is where the exhibition takes place. It was created by Jay Joplin, who's a major actor in the field, having promoted artists of the YBA generation, but also many others after that. So, the gallery is now huge. It has several spaces across the world. In London, 2 spaces, New York, Hong Kong, Paris, and Seoul. So this exhibition takes place at the Bermondsey location, which is bigger than many art centers that we know. I mean,
Yeah.
it is like a small Kunstverein, basically. So the space is super impressive, and the scale it demands of the artists at times feels worrisome to me. I kind of feel like the artists will produce works in a bigger scale because they're represented by a bigger gallery. But with Emin, that is not a problem. She has paintings that are super small, like a kiss, as she says so herself, or huge. So as you enter, there's a big central corridor with small paintings on each side, but they're really, really small. They're like almost half an A4 sheet
Yeah.
uh, size. And at the end, so you see this big corridor with very small paintings. So you go and you really lean into the paintings to see them. So at the end there's a wall sculpture there that appears to be made of bronze, emulating those old medieval woods crucifixion sculptures you see at the British Museum, half eaten away by bugs, so the head is missing, part of the legs, but there's also a specific torsion of the body that alludes to the body of Christ. I mean, that's what I thought of. I mean, maybe it was me, but
Yeah,
of
no.
course it's kind of like obviously has that relationship to the history of sculpture. So overall, we are very far, I just have to say this, from sensation. And the fears that traditional means of art are dead because you cannot get a more traditional exhibition, sculpture and painting. On the surface, very traditional. So the space on the left has a smaller painting. So there's 3 big rooms and the corridor. The room on the left has 3, I think 3 bigger paintings and a
Yeah.
smaller one. And you start realizing that they all have the same colors: blue, black, red, and white. Or if one wants to be more poetic about it, as the text accompanying the show is, a palette, or quote, a palette of carmine, ivory, deep blues, and black temper, unquote, which I found really sweet. So the room on the right is much bigger, with a wall in the middle, and you tend to go around through the right and explore the narrative of the paintings, where there's some text. So some text starts appearing in these paintings in the second room. There's a narrative to the exhibition, right? It's not a complete narrative. You have to fill in the blanks, obviously, but there is a sort of narrative in the exhibition. So in this space, so some writings appear alluding to internal conflicts and emotions of entrapment and love. And most paintings so far of images of the body or bodies in bed, at times with cats, her own cats. And one has the immediate knowledge that this is personal, autobiographical, and confessional. And yet, it's also a very common experience. So, all the paintings depict being in bed, lying down, eating, masturbating, sleeping, aching, having sex,
Yeah.
etc., suffering, being ill, everything. It really is very relatable at the same time. So the other final space is even bigger, and it's for sure the most impactful one on a gut level because it has this big sculpture of a woman on all fours.
Yeah.
There's no doubt it's a woman, and a number of striking paintings where a confessional tone led her to write on them again. One of them says, "I don't want to have sex because my body feels dead." And you see it as you go in and go to the left, you see it from afar. And then on the same angle, but on the wall closer to you, there's a painting of a woman spreading her legs on a bed. So it's all very nuanced and conflicting. Everything's
Yeah.
about conflicting feelings. So the show ends with a video whose title escapes me now. I don't remember it, revealing one of the most challenging or changing aspects of a very turbulent life as it is for the artist, which is her soma. So after her cancer, her bladder was removed, a few organs around it, and she has to have an external and artificial bladder. And the video is basically her filming herself with a phone, I'm presuming, from below. And so you see a bit of her breast seen from below. You see her belly with this very alien like small kind of organ that looks a bit like a penis at times, stretching in and out and bleeding onto the belly. So there's kind of these rivulets of blood on the belly. And she explains that this is a quotidian experience for her. She needs to take care of it, and it bleeds very often. And she decided to film it. And it's a very the noise. It's delayed, so it's in slow motion. But you don't know that it's slow motion because it's almost a static image. But you hear a sort of sound in the background, like, and it's kind of a sort of an out of body experience. But there's a body there, and I can tell you that the reactions of the spectators when they go in is quite something. She's still out there shocking people.
I went in again, I knew her from vaguely the bed and some neons, and I did not associate her with painting. And so I wasn't sure what to expect, but going in there and seeing her paintings, oh my God, can the woman paint? What I was struck by in the paintings is there's parts of images that are detailed. You might have part of a face or part of a body that is recognizable and has, lines that represent such. But then there's disintegration of the image all over as well. And some
Yeah.
of it looks like a horror movie. That essence and the feeling of when you are ill, when you are depressed, when you are bleeding, and all of those things make you feel monstrous. This person she's representing is not fit for society. Like, they don't have any kind of the wherewithal, the energy to put on the things that it would take to put on to be acceptable. So many of the beds are, looking at vaguely the same angle, but kind of a little bit different each time. And sometimes, as you say, you might see one of the cats, Teacup and Pancake, or what they're called. They're adorable, all over Instagram. I
Oh.
really encourage you to have a look. But they are so cute. But you might see the cat in the background, or you might get more detail in the wallpaper that you don't have in another, but that you get the sense of time passing.
Oh, I didn't think of that because it's true that you think these are days,
Yeah.
right? These are several days. So, just for clarification, or maybe for visualization, for those who can't make it to the show for various reasons, they are very impressive because so the bigger paintings are very impressive because they look like a sketch,
Mm-hmm.
like someone is telling you something they can't tell with words, so they
Yeah.
have to make a sketch to show you. And so for me, the impressive thing is, how do you make a sketch that big? Because she never prepares for paintings. She doesn't beforehand define structure, a bit like Alice Neal. She kind of went into the raw painting. And so, but she doesn't, she's depicting herself. So, unlike Alice Neal, she doesn't have an external um, reference to paint. She's painting herself as she felt in her bed. And so she's sketching. She's like, okay, so I was here, so I was crying, so you see the tears down my face. And then, well, you see I was bleeding as well. So she shows the blood, like really quick brush strokes,
Yeah.
but in such a magnitude for someone who was so sick for 6 months, couldn't hold a brush, couldn't make tea. She was so unwell. And then to make these very big paintings that are just showing you pain points, pleasure points, happiness points, points of strangeness, of uncanniness,
Mm-hmm.
from above, seen from above, like a sort of a godlike thing. But it's really, uh, I am painting this thing that I was feeling. And like
Mm-hmm.
you say, there are moments where you can see the face, moments where there's a few portraits. So in the first room in on the right, it's the more internal one where she's stating that she's afraid of being loved. She feels dispossessed of herself if she's desired. That's what the text says in a very repetitive manner.
Mm-hmm.
She writes really well, and the text is really beautiful because at the beginning you're like, oh, text, okay,
Yeah.
can't read her writing, but then you cannot stop reading because it's
Yeah.
so fascinating and so clear what she's saying. I think maybe for us women, but also for so many people trapped in a relationship that clearly is dispossessing you. And she speaks of her fear of not being herself, and you feel like her not being herself is her not being able to ruminate through painting. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's three portraits where the first one, she's kind of almost disappearing and she draws. So she paints, I say she draws. I mean, it is a kind of drawing on raw canvas. So you can see the canvas as well. And the face is almost disappearing. They're kind of ghostly, these
Yeah.
paintings.
But that notion of, we all have those moments, right? That we are depressed, we are ill, we are, for one reason, we're in pain. For one reason or another, we are in bed. And a lot of, I mean, we spend a third of our time there just sleeping, hopefully, in a normal way. So, I mean, so much of our lives are passed in bed for one reason or another. And if, as she seems to depict in the exhibition, having a period of life where you are spending a lot more time in bed, are we not ourselves in that moment? I mean, when we're in pain, when we're in depression, when we're ill. And I think that what I really appreciated about the exhibition is that this is the human experience. This is her human experience. This is all of our human experience. And it's so easy to think of that time as like dead time. I mean, I have spent a lot of time in bed lately. I mean, way more than I ever have. Was diagnosed with a rare blood condition, and there's, the treatment is, all working and it's all manageable and it's all going to be fine. But there's been a period of time here where I have had no energy
Mm,
and spending, a lot more time in bed. And, having those moments where it's like you'll fall asleep so fully and you'll wake up in
mm,
the middle of the day and be like, God, what day is it? Is it morning or is it evening? Or, that disorientation that you can get from these times in our lives where you are not doing what you normally do. And I think what I left thinking about is how we frame those kinds of times, how I frame this time in my own life. I mean, is it a time that is that like time when I wasn't myself, when I'm, and then I'll get back to myself, and then but this is all part of it. So it's like I think there's something about acknowledging and embracing the moments in your life when our bodies and our minds and our souls stop us in our busy tracks and say, you're going to be in bed for a little while. And it felt like that it was very alive on the canvases that she had. There was one that she had that wasn't in a bed, but it was like a body in a urban landscape, and I don't remember the name of it, but there was a building, obvious buildings in the background, and then they are outside, kind of naked
Yes.
and lying down, and there was something about that, like that vulnerability in a public space, and there was something about the way she drew the windows on the building. They were so innocent. They were the way she drew the shape of the rectangle for the windows was as like very childlike, like you would see in a child's drawing.
Mm-mm-mm.
And it was just this combination of these elements that she manages to manifest, along with, just incredible, layering of the painting itself. But I mean, I was just blown away. Like, it really was so moving. This is the first one that I've gone to see twice. And I mean, truth be told, it was not that far from a place where I've been going for my appointments. Um, but, but yeah, it really felt like, having another immersion was necessary to absorb a lot of what she was putting across.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when I got in and I saw the exhibition, I thought, I wonder how Emily's going to feel, because it definitely is an exhibition that frames the ill body in a way that embraces its abject side. And the video is there to say, this is the body, and this is the state it's in. There's a femininity to illness as well. So, as you know, I've also been unwell for very different reasons, but also
Yeah.
with, blood related issues with anemia. And you ask yourself those questions. You say, what
Mm.
about sex? What about pleasure? What about where is pleasure now? And I had the same experience as you, where because I was so deeply anemic, that I had to have a blood transfusion. But one of the things that now that I'm better, much, 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 much better, that I miss are the way I slept. The
Ah.
sleep
Mm.
is so deep. It's so populated with dreams and images. As someone who's aphantasic, I don't visualize when I'm awake. Dreams are quite fantastic for me, but I'm not a good dreamer. But when I was in that state, the dreams were so incredible. And like you say, is this experience not to be valued?
Yeah.
Are you not yourself? Your question is incredible because are you still yourself? And the reason why you're asking that question is that because society keeps telling you a lot of things about your body, about your gender, about your role in society, about your work, about your value, about your appearance. And all of that comes into very clear becomes a very clear picture when you're unwell, when you're ill. What about the sculpture? We didn't
Oh,
talk about it.
yeah, the sculpture is incredible. I mean, I liked your description of it, of like that replicating a wooden sculpture that has been around for eons and has just aged, and parts of it have fallen off. And I think that describes it so well. Um, But yeah, I mean, talk about.
No, but the big
No,
sculpture
I
in the
know.
big
But
room.
that too, it kind of has that
Yes, same.
feeling,
It's the same.
yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
But
Yeah.
yeah, vulnerable. That is a very vulnerable position. Basically it's a woman on her knees, but you only get the lower half. It's enormous. You can't not look at it, I mean,
But
it's
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 huge.
enormous. Yeah. I didn't even know what I was looking at first.
Yeah.
When I
Yeah.
was like, I don't, and then finally you get to an angle where you're like, oh, okay,
Oh.
sure.
Oh, it's a
Okay.
pussy.
Yeah. 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 And
That's what it was.
that's what it is. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I loved it. Yeah, it was great. I feel like if that were done on a different size, if it were smaller, if it were, it would feel, I don't know. There was something really impactful about the size of it and the enormity of it, for sure.
It's so gigantic. I was talking to Diogo, who also went to see the exhibition, and I was like, okay, so you're the artist. Like, how does one make a sculpture like that? It's
Yeah.
bronze. How does one go about making it? Because it's like the paintings. You imagine it to be molded with the hands,
Mm.
but then it's huge. And even if there's a trick to it, I'm pretty sure that if Tracey Emin was here, she'd say, well, do you know what? I did it with my hands. Then I enlarged it, 3D printed some cast
Mhm.
of whatever. It doesn't matter because it
Yeah.
still is this decision of making like you can go under it. It makes me think of Mother, the Spiders by Louise Bourgeois.
Mm.
You can go under it. You can it would crush you if it fell on you. Like you would immediately die. It's so big,
Yeah.
and yet it seems to have been molded by a distracted child. And it's the ravaged body, but at the same time, it's the moving body, the body kind of like flowing and being in itself and being all flesh. There's something, a sort of a tribute to a simple relationship with the body as well, right?
Mm.
A literal, this is what it is, and that's where suddenly the pleasure and the happiness comes again. And I kind of went in there and seeing, yeah, I mean, she did a lot for us. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
she did a lot for us. She's doing a lot for us, and I felt like a sister, like the
Mhm.
sisterhood is working. And we have space now to talk about these things, and we're doing a podcast where we reference these things, which was not
Mm.
possible a few years back. And she's one of those little sisters who was weaving in the background and made it possible. So thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Tracy Emin.
Totally.
Thank you so
Totally.
much. We're here
And
because of you. And thanks to you and many other sisters as well. She's not alone in this. She contributed.
I feel so lucky that I didn't know much before, and now there is this wealth of, it's like finding the gold pot at the end of the rainbow of work of hers to be able to dive into and explore. I mean, there's so much. I agree wholeheartedly that I feel appreciative of the work that she has done because of what it has done for me and the connection that I have had to it. But what I love about her, and maybe this is true for way more artists, maybe it's true for all artists, I don't know. But with her, I really get the sense that she doesn't need me to feel any way. And, I get the strong presence from her that she is doing it for herself first and foremost because she has to. She just has to get in there and do it. And there's a freedom in that I feel, she is not pandering to one single person, and there's
Mm,
a freedom in being in a relationship with art that isn't asking anything of me, but is just saying, this is it, you know, this is what I got. Do with it as you may.
I was thinking there's always amongst women artists this recurring, especially artists of like two generations up from me
Hmm.
that I speak to, who are in their 70s, 80s, who are kind of disgusted by their peers who are making very confessional, gender based work. They are more conceptual artists, and they say, gender is not important for me. And I really hate it when women put that out there.
Mm.
And it's very conflicting because as I've said before, I really do love conceptual art, and it's formed me. It's I'm built into that, or it's built into me. And I'm always a bit grieved. I have a sort of grievance regarding that, where I loved what you said, because she might not be for everyone, or she might not be for every stage in your life.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might not want to bask in that. But I think there's a beauty and understanding. That's what we try to do with the podcast. And it goes back to our conversation in the first episode, where there's a space for everyone. And some people are very um, self respecting of their privacy and their intimacy, and they don't want to put it out there. That's not what they have to give to the world. And the art world sometimes, or the contemporary art spaces, are a sort of a platform where everyone is together. But it's not a platform. It's a very big building with lots of little rooms and secret areas, and that's how I
Mm-hmm.
see the art world. And I don't. For a long time, I was very against, self narrative and exposure, and I remember coming into the art world as a kid almost, and having the YBA behind me in the
Mm-hmm.
90s, hearing about bed and hearing about everybody I slept with, and being really confused by it, because that's not what I was being told by philosophy, art criticism, aesthetics. That was something not to do. That was something that we had overcome by conceptualism, minimalism. We were not there anymore. That was a no go. And I remember not knowing what to think of it. But at the same time, a part of me was speaking to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's some grief in me when I hear some women talk about other women artists, like, why is she doing that? Again,
Mm.
I don't know. I think we need to give space to that. Maybe
Y-
it's not our jam. Maybe it's not for every day, but I mean, she's out there and she's, painting her own truth. I don't think
Yeah.
many people get to say that.
Great. So the show is at the White Cube Bermondsey until the 10th of November in London. So if you have time, do go check it out. And Joanna, do you want to say a little bit about who we have teed up for next time?
Yes, so we're going back to the Curve at the Barbican. If you remember, it's a very, very special exhibition space that is, you guessed it, curved. So that's what we will be talking about, but very specifically of Pamela Fatsimo Sundstrom's project called It Will End in Tears. I mean, we are in it for very, very pathos driven titles this
Mm-hmm.
season. So that's our next episode. And if you want to prepare for the third one, we will be talking about Mike Kelly at Tate Modern. So we're in for very, very interesting episodes for
Yeah,
sure.
indeed.
And also, we have something new that
Yeah.
I'm putting out there. So, very tentatively, because we are of a certain age and we are not very good with this kind of thing, but we are trying. So, we are trying not to have any ads in the podcast. We're trying to kind of remain one, accessible, so no subscriptions, no bonus episodes, and second, just a conversation that you might overhear in a cafe.
Yeah.
Well, spoiler, we do edit quite a bit. This is scripted and edited, but also very improvised. It's prepared improvisation. But so that's the two things that are really important to us. So if you want to support this effort, this endeavor, we are in it for the long run. So we will be doing this for a long time, and therefore, because of that, we would urge you to go to Patreon and become a member. So you can just pay for a membership. It's the price of a latte. So maybe not a latte on Tuesdays and a podcast on Fridays for you. You can go to Patreon. We have a page there, Exhibitionist's Podcast. you can become a member. And in that way, for very little money a month, you can support us, and we can keep on doing this much more comfortably than we do now. And maybe we can produce more episodes if there's a bunch of you who support us. That would be really, really great.
Yeah.
So that's it. Very tentatively putting it out there, and hopefully you will follow through. The link is in the show notes. It's also on our Instagram, so you can access it really easily. And if you have trouble, there's always our email. Contact us, give us ideas, give us feedback, leave us reviews. Also, 5 stars or more, and a nice comment is very welcome.
Yeah, totally. All
That's
of
it.
that. Yeah, brilliant. All right. Well, thank you so much, Joanna. This is brilliant. I really talk about starting season 2's first exhibition with a real barnstormer. This is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Your insights are always, always so welcome and so enriching for me personally, and I'm sure for our listeners. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And see you next time, and talk to you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.